Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Mama. This week I am bringing you not one, but two phenomenal guests. Why? Because it's my birthday. And all I ask as a birthday gift is that if you like this podcast, you like, share, or subscribe, or do all of them. That would be amazing. So who are my guests? I'm speaking to researcher at Queen's University Belfast, Dr. Drew Mikhael, about the Lebanon crisis. I am also speaking to Monroe France, who is New York University's Associate Vice President for Global Inclusion. And both of them are going to give us context on how to be better global citizens, because is that not what the world needs right now? So without further ado, here are my incredible...
Thank you so much, Monroe, for joining me on Coffee with Candice. You are someone I've always respected. Your voice, your activism, just your sense of being in the world is so incredibly powerful. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Of course. I mean, I think we're kindred spirits, Candice. From the moment I met you and Bloemfontein, of all places, right in the Free State, I was like, who is this woman? I got to know her. And let's talk further about this thing about forgiveness. What does that look like, right? And so we had this brilliant phone, as you probably remember, on the bus as we were making our way to Kwa, a really wonderful conversation, and and a really honest and transparent. And I think in many ways, for me at least, got to know you really as this very thoughtful human being. And so whenever you were asked, for me to show up, of course I'm there. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I want to, Monroe, you have, really risen at New York University. You are the Vice President of Global Inclusion. And you don't get to that rank, you don't get to that position, and you don't get that voice without a lot of hard work, especially as a Black man, and so I want to
right.
just a little bit and speak about how did you get to this position?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. And I would clarify too, associate vice president, not vice president yet, but it will happen one day. Yes, for sure. So that's the thing about having a vision. I think having a vision for yourself and being willing to, I'm sorry, my phone is going off. Having a vision for yourself and being willing to take risk and being willing to engage and being willing to have courage around what you want in your career, I think is very important. Of course, too, I've had lots of really tremendous role models, especially Black women who have been really kind and generous to me over the course of my career and just life. And I think that has helped a lot. And then the foundation that, growing up with my great grandmother, who at the age of 11, she took me and my two brothers in, and she was a fierce woman, fierce Black woman, and wore big hats on Sunday at church, and she was such an educator and such a change agent. And so I think so many gifts that she gave me in terms of understanding myself in the world has really helped me in my career as well, to be authentic, to be willing to speak truth to justice, even when it's not comfortable. And I think the other thing too is sort of following your passion, right? And so that's the thing that, has been really important for me, is that I need to feel a sense of joy and passion in the work that I do, and to feel like I have some sort of impact. And so all of my career has kind of been mission driven. And even when I've done things like I've worked in fashion for a bit, so I have a degree in fashion. But that was not in terms of in the area that I was working. I had to realize that was not what I was called to do. And so I think, the sense around calling and understanding who you are, what you're driven to do has helped my career over time. Yeah. To get me where I am. And I think the last thing too, I would say is that, thinking outside of the box, right? That, I like to say that, I bring try to bring the sexy to change, change-based work or social justice. And what I mean by that is that, I think, this work, we should be thriving towards everyone and feeling a sense of liberation and freedom, that, you're able to live the life that you want to live without restraint, but that then doesn't limit the capacity and ability for others, right? And so it's both how are you able to live this sense of self-actualization, self-liberation, while also not limiting that ability for someone else. And so to me, that's what has driven me in my career. Yeah.
That is so powerful. And I want to know, have you always been this way? Have you always been so comfortable just being yourself and also initiating change? Because I know some people grow into it. Other people have just always been comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think you grew into it, or you have always just been comfortable with it?
No, that's a great question. So what I would say is that there are some ways in which that I feel that I've always had too big of a mouth, and would question. And I remember so many occasions in elementary school and middle school getting into trouble for talking too much, or for deciding to be the person that takes on an issue or a cause, even when it was not directly maybe impacting me in some way. And I think that just came internally in some ways. I think some personality traits you're just like born with, and then you cultivate over time. And so I think that, in some ways I was born with this mouth, born with this sense of, I'm going to speak truth to justice and wanting things to be right. And then the other thing too, I think, which it's been a cornerstone for how I live in the world, is this sense of curiosity and being a learner. And that's a part of building relationships with people in a sense of curiosity, wanting to learn their story and who they are and what their narratives are. But then also the sense of curiosity and learning of the world. And, I think that has also, aided to me wanting to be, a part of the world, in and of the world, right? And so yes, I think, I remember too in middle school and junior high school, so many of my friends, I was that person that was in every different kind of circle. And then I went to a Jesuit, university, for my bachelor degree, and immediately, continued to throw myself into this, very predominantly white institution. Not that was my first time engaging with large groups of white people, but because that was part of my history growing up, but been immediately immersing myself into that experience in a way in which that I was became to create I think would say a trail, laying the trail for other Black students going into that university. And that again came from this sense of, I don't know, some drive that was always there that I just have to cultivate over time, and then learning from other people too. And that's a part of being a learner. You're learning from other people. Yeah.
I love that. There's a phrase you used. It's speaking truth to justice. And I think as, the world is evolving during this period of COVID, a lot has come to the surface, especially in the US. Outside of the US too, a lot of stuff has happened, but the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd was the ignition for the world's conversation, right? And so I want to know, as a Black American man, how did you feel about, the whole George Floyd incident, and how do you feel the conversation has moved forward since then?
Thank you. So the first thing I would say is that George Floyd was a tipping point in a moment, but it cannot be. I don't think we can talk about why George Floyd's death became sort of this marker or this moment without also contextualizing it into the pandemic, right? Because I think it provided the conditions for people to be really focused in some way, because people were not at work all around the world. And so I think that gave a platform for people to feel a sense of greater freedom to be out in the streets and to organize in a different kind of way. And then, of course, we saw the grotesque moment, on video. And so that was another thing too. But then, and this is a long time coming, right? So it was nothing new in so many ways that, there's been so many other deaths. And then right around that time, we had, Ahmaud, we had Breonna, right? And so it wasn't just him. And so this was a moment of buildup and, people's frustration and their anger and just being tired, right? Tired of having to see these senseless deaths over and over again. And I have to say, I felt the same, right? And so, for myself, just just done and angry with this, but also not needing that to understand how insidious this is and how painful it is. I've never watched a video. And I won't watch the video. And I have made a decision for myself that I will not watch any other videos of Black bodies being trampled upon, Black bodies being murdered, being abused and murdered, and violence against Black bodies. I just won't, because I don't need to see that to understand how bad it is and how much we must reckon with this. And, I think about the work of Brian Stevenson, when he talks about, we need to reckon with our past to be able to understand this moment, right? And so I think that for me, is the way in which that I've resonated with this. And I think how the conversation has moved forward in some ways is that, so many people are focused now on what are we going to do? So this piece around needing to have a plan. I think we need, to be really candid, all around the world, we need people who have power to have a plan. And so if you're benefiting from white supremacy, then you need to have a plan for what are you going to do to address it. So that's your problem. If you're getting benefits from it, that you need to figure out what you're going to do to address it. And so I think this plan and having an action. Right? What are we going to do? The plan, and what are we going to do to create change? We need to go beyond the Black Lives Matter. I know that already. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I already know my life matters. I already know that I'm badass. But what are we going to do to to make change? And I think that's becoming more a part of the conversation in a way that I don't know has existed in mainstream conversations in the way that it has needed to in the past. And so I hope we can keep up with this momentum. I'd like to say that this is a new day, but we need to hold fast to this day and make this day mean something. And so that's, to me, again, going back to this piece around plan and action.
Oh,
yeah.
And you have been in this field for a very, very long time. Yeah. So this conversation is nothing new to you. Right. And I want to know, when people come to me and they say, Monroe, I feel guilt, I feel something. How do I move forward? Because I have no idea. I know I benefit from white supremacy. I know I benefit unfairly from the way the systems and my ancestors have built this country. But how do I move forward from this moment? What do you say to them?
Yeah, and that's another good question. So I think there's, you got to start from the place in which you can have the greatest influence and impact. So I think that's the piece. Not all people are going to be, depending on what country context you live in, a political context. I was just in a conversation literally right before here in Abu Dhabi, here in my apartment in New York, in Brooklyn. And we were talking about, that in many places around the world, there's not a social condition or political condition in which you can protest because you will lose your life. And so we have to think from the place in which that we can make impact, from the place in which that we have the capacity to create change. For some of us, it will be using our voice. For some of us, it will be writing. For some of us, it will be in the courtroom. So for some people, it's going to be in the streets. For others, it's going to be about how are you raising your children, and and doing something differently. Right? That you're not raising your children to just assume that everything's owed to them because of their racial identity. And so. For being white. Not everything's owed to me because of being a man or cisgender, right? And so not trans. So I think that, piece around moving from guilt is not helpful. Sitting in your guilt is not helpful. White guilt is not helpful. It gets us nowhere. And so you got to work out of that very quickly. Call a friend, get to you got to have a group of people that are going to move you along. But you cannot stay there. You got to get to a place then where you say, okay, I get it. It has been terrible. My people have done some really wrong things. I've benefited from that. So now you've taken acknowledgement of it. And now let's move on. And let's figure out what actions are we going to take to make difference. Yeah.
And what do you say to people who say, I don't want to be performative? Because, there is a way of, we saw it on Instagram, right? Where people were posting the little black squares with no real context, and they post the black square, and then the next day it's we're back to normal. And it's okay, but you have time to research, read, speak to someone,
Right.
So what's that fine line for you between someone who genuinely wants to implement change and someone who's doing it in a way that comes across as very performative in nature?
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of that, right? And I think this is where we need to be critical of social media because it can be very good. I mean, it's connected us globally. I've been able to stay in touch with friends like you, right? And all over the world. And so that has been like, that's the plus. That's it. Like, that's the added advantage of like, having social media, etc. But then there are other ways in which that it has become about just how do we position ourselves and like how do we show that like we're either like irrelevant to this contemporary moment or like becomes a way in which that we do these cursory things to show that we're down. And so for me, I don't like to get caught up with that too much. I'm like, okay, who's ready to act? Who's ready to really do some real work? I'm going to work with those people, right? I'm going to work with the people that are ready to mobilize, be responsive in the way that makes right, again, in a way that makes sense contextually for them. But for those that, this is just another tagline, another something you put up, I would say don't get caught up too much with them. In the words of Marsha P. Johnson, who was one of the people that kicked off the Stonewall protest, right, for the rights of LGBTQ plus people, she said, "Child, pay them no mind." So I think in some ways, child, pay them no mind, the people who are just doing this for, a moment to be seen, and let's focus on the people who are ready to do the work, right? Yeah.
Focusing on the people that are ready. I think that is so important, especially when you look at movements such as All Lives Matter or, any contrarian movement that actually makes no sense, right?
No sense, God.
It's like, you're making no sense. And I think for me, in the beginning of, trying to raise awareness and have really conducive conversations, what I found to be very interesting is that people who believe in All Lives Matter usually don't want to have a conversation. They're not actually open to engaging. And every time I say to them, it's like, I'm a straight woman. And if I use my voice to speak for, the LGBTQ plus community, I'm not taking over their struggle, but I'm just saying that, okay, I understand that they're a community that needs a voice at this time because society is refusing to recognize them, freedom of choice. And so it's always crazy to me when you explain the same, like the exact same thing to someone who says all lives matter, and then they say to you, no, but in the name of Jesus or whatever, all lives matter. You're like, historically speaking, what you're saying doesn't even hold water.
Right, exactly.
So I want to know, like, from you, I mean, you work with us on a day-to-day basis, and I want to know when people come against and they oppose you in the sense of the All Lives Matter movement, or, everyone is allowed to get married, but, this, and they always have that stupid little but. How do you deal with it on an emotional level and on just, a day-to-day level?
Yeah, I mean, some days is a real struggle. I mean, to be real, I've been at this for, well over 20 years. And, in some days, depending on how I slept, some days, depending on what else has happened to me in a build up, I might be a little bit more like frustrated or angry, and you can see it in the way that I respond. Now, when I'm in my right mind and more balanced, or, a person, for whatever, whomever they are, because sometimes some people just trigger you in a particular kind of way and make you want to go all the way there. So, when I don't allow them to have that level of power, the way that I think about this is that, to your point, what are they really, like, is my sense, are they asking or making this cause because they're trying to understand and learn, or are they doing this to manipulate and to continue to hold power over in the conversation? If they're trying to hold power over in the conversation, my whole notion is that I'm going to state the facts, I'm going to stay on facts, and then I'm going to let them do whatever else they want to do, because that is not time worth giving, right? Again, I want to give my time to things where I can see outcomes, my time where I can see, there's a possibility for creating change. I'm not going to keep pushing up against a wall that doesn't want to move. And so, a lot of people spend a lot of time doing that. And I, from my perspective, like, hallelujah for them. Like, if that's where you want to spend your time, maybe you're going to make an impact. My perspective on this is that, I'm like, people who are ready, I'm ready to be there with you and to be engaged. And sometimes that readiness is that you're going to ask questions that, for me, I might think, wow, really? you're really still asking that kind of question. But you can tell the difference where someone is like trying to make meaning, trying to make sense, and they're like willing to learn, rather than those that, they're using this to continue to perpetuate, this power dynamic in which that they put themselves in the center and hold and harness that power. If that's what the goal is and that's what they're trying to do, it's not worth it. And especially for me as a person of color, as a Black man, as a queer Black man, and especially if they're holding the dominant space around race, like race being white or other facets of identity, I think, is that my cause to do that? Is that what I'm called to do, to spend time? Now, it's one thing if I'm like, I was at a training session with an organization yesterday, I think, no, day before yesterday. And, someone got very upset that I was situating sort of racial justice and understanding racism within the context of the global pandemic, right? And that how the disparate impact on already marginalized people are of Black and Indigenous and people of color in the US and all around the world. People are making masks in China and Korea. What does that mean for the poor folks having to come up the front lines to continue to make themselves vulnerable, or, delivery workers, et cetera, all around the world. And so they were upset that I was making that point and said that, I was minimizing the pandemic by making it a racial justice conversation. So I was like, wow. And so myself and then someone else that was in the session tried to educate. And then at some point, because the resistance was so deep, I was like, I got to move on. You got to move on, because others here want to learn. And I cannot let this person co-opt this conversation in a way that, the resistance is so deep that it's not worth it in this moment. And maybe eventually at some point someone else will say something, you can get it. But it was clear to me that my message was not resonating with him. And so I had to give up on that, right? And I had to go back to my notes and put the focus of the talk and focus on that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And I want to ask you, from a legal standpoint, or from judicial, governmental, systematic standpoint, what more needs to be done by powers that be in order to make sure that we're not coming back to this conversation? Because I think, like you said, all Black people, not just Black people, all marginalized communities are tired. We're tired of saying the same thing over and over. And then to have these, ignition moments, your George Floyd, or, someone being killed because they're trans, or whatever the case is. And what do you think needs to be done in a legal capacity so that people can start actually having repercussions for these kind of actions and hate speech and hate behavior?
Yeah, so much needs to be done, right? In my ideal world, we need to just throw the system out and start all over, right? And that's when we will see true reform, right? And so I don't know that we're going to have that. So, okay, given that that's not possible, then this is our dream. This is the great dream. And then what do we need to do to work towards that? And so I do think an overhaul of the ways in which we think about criminal justice, needs to really change. Brian Stevenson, I just use him again because he's so at the forefront of my mind, because we're using his book, Just Mercy, at NYU as a part of our first year student read. And so he talks about the importance of narrative and how we need to shift the narrative about people, shift the narrative about what does it mean to be Black in the United States, across the globe. What does it mean to be narrative about meaning to be Black and trans? What is the narrative about people who are foreign to us? So I think shifting those narratives, I think, are so critical. So I think we need to start from the place of whose narratives are are not whose narratives are not full. Whose narratives, I think about, Adichie Ngozi. So she talks about, this, the danger of a single story, right? And I think we need to move out of the narrative that, there's a single story about people, and then begin to start there to shift then our criminal justice system to make it really just. I think that we need to dismantle the ways in which that we think about, there's this justice and period, right? That needs to be much more comprehensive and broad. I also think then, there needs to be a redistribution of wealth. And so I know that's a radical notion, but I think it's possible. I think that this redistribution of wealth, and what does it mean to have a livable wage, so that people are like, you know, enfranchised, like financially. And it's not just that enfranchisement may not cure racism, because you can be rich and experience racism, you know. But what I would say though is that, like, you know, when we give people the financial means to be able to live their lives in a capitalist world, it gives people the more capacity to be liberated. And so I don't want to divorce, you know, this conversation around justice from a conversation around enfranchisement and being enfranchised and getting the resources you need to thrive. And so some people want to, I think, you know, the ways in which that we sometimes exploit poorness, being poor and poverty, as like, you know, oh, in the midst of all that, they still did great. Look at them, how humble they are. They can still find joy. Yes, and guess what? Stuff is still hard for them, right? And so, you know, we tell ourselves that narrative to make us feel better about what we have and our own privileges. And so to recap my long diatribe is that I think we need to shift narrative. We need to reframe and reimagine and dismantle parts of the criminal justice system across the world. And then we also need to think about the redistribution of wealth.
No, I mean, I could listen to you speak for ages, only because I think you're just such a wealth of knowledge. And the one thing I do like that you brought up is a conversation no one likes around the world, including in South Africa, which is redistribution of wealth. And
yes,
there's always counter arguments to that. And what you covered is exactly what I believe, that when someone is thinking on an empty stomach, they're not making decisions that are going to benefit them. They're making decisions that are going to keep them alive, moment to moment, day by day. And so to engage those people who are hungry and they're going through poverty and their family's sick, and say to them, oh, we need to reform the government, we need to do this. They're not at the table for that. They're at the table to say, where's my next meal coming from?
exactly,
You know,
sure.
and so change is very difficult when there is such like wealth disparity in any country and in any place. And so elections are actually coming up, or they're actually taking place right now, right, for the US. And I watched Michelle Obama's speech. Which, and I mean, Queen. I love the Obamas, like I was, and I love AOC. I just love what's happening right now. Kamala Harris, all of them. But I want to know, I don't know if you've heard the speech lately that, you know, where she's really urging people. I want to know your standpoint right now with where the country currently is. And are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about, you know, where things are headed, about Joe Biden, about Kamala Harris? So what's going on in your mind?
Oh God, you're asking me a real question. I'm about to get real. I'm not making a lot of friends right now. Maybe. So here are my thoughts about this, right? The sad thing is that there are a lot of people who are like, you know, who are fans and friends of the Trumpist narrative and rhetoric and believe deeply, or either feel a sense of seeing themselves in him. And, you know, and these are some of the very same people who may, like in conversations, you think that they're like, you know, that they're, because they don't speak up as loudly, that like, you know, that they may not be supporters. And, you know, then they go into the, like, you know, ballot boxes and do something different. And so I think we need to be really dogmatic at this moment. And this is leading to my thoughts about Biden and Harris and Kamala. So I think we need to be really dogmatic and very pragmatic in this moment in some ways, while also holding true to our values and like you're holding true to, you know, the things we firmly and deeply believe in, idealistically and also ideologically. And so what I would say with this is that, you know, I'm like, at any cost, we need to get this man out of office. And, you know, and so I say this outside of my role as like as an employee at NYU. And so I think at any cost, we need to get this man out of the office. Am I excited about, like, you know, where we are in terms of our choice of who we have? You know, I'm on a journey there, right? And so because I want something that's more progressive, right? You know, I don't want to keep taking the crumbs. You know, I'm over the crumbs from the table. I want the whole damn table. And so, so for me, I feel that, looking at the policy agenda, looking at, sort of where I think we need to move, so pragmatic, get them out of whatever cost possible. Then on the other side, we need to hold people who are supposed to be representing us accountable. And people need to be out there vocal in the same way that we are with Trump. And not in a way of okay, we're trying to dismantle their campaign, but in a way in which that we're trying to make their campaign as broad and deep and as progressive as possible. And I think we cannot rest on our laurels. And I firmly believe that, and that's counter to what some of my other friends and people I care deeply about may believe. Because I think we still have to have a sense of critical, we have to have a sense of critical awareness and engagement. Yeah, because our voices matter, and if our voices matter, then we need to make our voices matter in every single moment, right? And so that's what I believe. That's what I think. I want to see it in November, that we have a power change. I need to see it. So that's where I am. Am I nervous? Hell yes, I'm nervous. I'm very, very nervous. And what we see too is a global moment around popularism and this global nationalist moment. So there are lots of dictators in power all around the world. And some of them are not just white. So that's a thing too that we need to grapple with. What is this contemporary moment that we're dealing in? And why is that? I mean, I think part of it, again, is people are so fearful of losing their toys and what they believe is theirs. And so they're doing everything they can around the globe to hold on to it. And so that's a moment, that's why I think we need to be loud and vocal and be dogmatic about it. Yeah, about justice.
Yeah, I love what you said about, you're tired of getting the crumbs at the table, because that's what it does feel like, right? And not just in the US, and I like that you highlighted that. I'm in South Africa, and of course, I've got a Black president and a Black leader. And the irony is, criminal activity is criminal activity. Corruption is corruption. And I think where we find ourselves as South Africans, as opposed to Americans, where, there is almost when you look at Trump, because he's so outrageous, there is an element of being able to be oh, he's terrible, because he allows you to be able to critique him in that way because of his behavior. Whereas when you're in a country like this, where the president seems like a very nice guy, and, he says all the right things when he does actually speak, yet you see how, I think for us it was 500 billion rands, which would be around $500 million, which just disappeared, vanished. And the president simply said, I have no idea where that money went, which is, of course, is a reassuring.
Okay.
Yeah, which is reassuring for any citizen, right? So I think that globally, we are all going through a change. And I think that's the one thing COVID has allowed us to do. Take a pause, take a beat, and assess. And I think that's what we need. So in your perspective, in an ideal world, what is an ideal leader? What is an ideal president or someone who's going to, take power or office?
Someone that's a learner. Clearly, the one I got here in the United States is not a learner. And when I said that, because then, this person is open to other possibilities, and it's just not their way. It's the only way. And so we need leaders, I believe, that are learners, people who are transparent and honest, even when things get tough and you can't do exactly everything people want you to do, because there are lots of demands on people who are in leadership roles, and I don't want to minimize that, and it's hard, and and I've been a manager for some time, and there are times you have to make decisions that are not going to be favorable for everyone, and that it's not always a great place to be in. You're not going to always be popular, not always going to be liked, but if you're transparent and you're able to explain your thinking, your rationale while you're making decisions, I think you get people more sympathetic, empathetic to your the position you're in. We need someone that's willing to work collaboratively amongst people, across amongst different kinds of people. And then the last thing, I think we need someone who is someone that's that takes their work seriously, but, and takes their cause seriously, but understand that, they're a champion of a cause. It's not just about them. And so narcissism, yeah, I think we see. So what we don't need is narcissism, like in a leader, because that's a very scary place to be in. And that, to your point about this global moment, I think that's, just, I spend a lot of time in South Africa, so I get it, and I can often draw some parallels to, our journeys, right? And so, whether it's for like dismantling apartheid, or like, this thing around reconciliation and like, and what does that mean? To us also going through this journey here, and so I think that piece around, someone as a learner, that a leader must be humble in some ways. A leader must work collaboratively, and must have some level of transparency. I think those are the things that I would say we need in this moment. Oh, and the last thing too, on many levels, we need people who are courageous. And so that courage means that sometimes that you're having to be bold, you're having to go against the norm. And when I say going against the norm, I mean these vestiges that have continued to help keep sort of white supremacy at the core of how we understand colonization, reproduced and reproduced time and time again in different kinds of ways and repackaged. But at the end of the day, it's still colonization. And so how do we need a leader that's willing to be courageous to disrupt that, and to think outside of that, what has become normalized and rooted in our systems. Yeah.
Oh man, that is, I can't even add to that. I think you've covered it. You've covered it so well. And I think you're right. When it comes to narcissism, there's no room for it in office, right? Because narcissism actually eradicates every other good quality you've just said.
right.
The opposite of narcissism is what we're looking for.
Right. I mean, I know many of us probably have narcissistic, partners or lovers, and you're like, whoa, or you hit a side of it, it's like, run. How do you run? Run. Run to the hills.
Yeah. And so now wrapping it up, and I hate to, because you're just such an incredible wall of knowledge. I want to know, just coming back to Monroe on a personal front, and I want to know first, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you smiling? What keeps you, going through this work? Because the work you do is not easy. So I want to know, how do you keep your vibration up?
Yeah, more and more over time, I've had to separate sometimes what is work, from who am I, right? And that's not always easy, but, understanding that, some of this is work. Some of this is rooted in, where, my calling. So being able to differentiate between those and distinguish between those, I think it's key. And then also distinguishing between who am I and where's the work, and where myself and the work begin and stop, because those boundaries, and I'm not perfect at that, let me tell you, right? And so it's an ongoing journey that I'm on to figure that out. But I think it has helped create a greater space of happiness and trying to find happiness in this moment. And so I think that's important. I'm actually moving out of the city, moving out of Brooklyn to the suburbs next week. You wouldn't know about the condition of my apartment right now, but it's happening. And that was a decision for happiness and greater joy, right? In terms of living in the midst of COVID, and working at home in the midst of a pandemic. And so, I wanted more beauty around me, more trees, being able to go outside and, my neighbors, which I've already had that happen, waving at me and saying hello. On several occasions now, I've gone back, because the house closed about a month ago or so. But I haven't moved yet. And so I've gone over a lot. And someone has been having my lawn landscape for me. So being in a space where you get people who are that kind and that sense of generosity. I know you consider yourself a kindness activist, and I like to distinguish the difference between kindness and nice. Nice is doormat. Kind is an act of understanding the power you still hold in that moment and making that as a choice. And so when people being kind like that, and being able to be in spaces where there's there's a sense of humanity, that gives me joy. Right. And so I think those are the ways in which that, and then just being around good people, good people, helps when you have had a tough day, or where you're questioning yourself, or where you're wondering, like, where are we going next? And so being surrounded by good people.
Oh man, congratulations firstly on the
Thank you.
house. I can't wait to
Thank
visit.
Yes, of course. I got a bedroom named Candice. Yes.
I love it. Congratulations. You deserve it. And the last question I'm going to close with is, if you could go back in a time capsule and you could speak to 18-year-old Monroe, what are some things you'd say to yourself?
God. Yeah, that's a lot. Again, being that, like, very, I'm very bold, and, like, sometimes a little left of, like, sort of what might be right at times in terms of how I went about things. One would be, which I've worked on a lot over time of my career, actually, is that it's not about righteousness, like, always being righteous, right? And it's not always about being right. That, there are times in which that there's more than I can understand. That there's time in which that, like, maybe, people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Again, Brian Stevenson. But I try to think about that, because that has helped me to better understand and be able to work with people. And so, but at 18, I was, like, I was a blooming activist, like, and I was already kind of doing activism for sure since I was, like, nothing. But then over time, I still was growing, and I had to realize that I didn't know everything. And so I think that you don't know everything. I don't have to always be right. Like, righteousness, like, is not necessarily something that always works. And that, like, a bit of greater kindness. And at that time, I actually thought kindness, like, and I'm not talking about nice, but kindness was a weakness. And I see that really as a strength, like, in my understanding of the world at this point. And so at 18, I didn't know that. So if I could go back there, but I wouldn't be who I am now if I were already there at 18. I mean, if I were already there at 18, I'd probably be a bit of a jerk now, because I'm like, I'm gonna have to learn. I've already figured it out, the world out. So what y'all gonna do? What y'all gonna? So thank goodness. I just also think too, I say this too, is that thank goodness I couldn't sing. Because if I could sing, and I would be the most pompous person in the world, because I would just, like, singing all the time. I would be, like, going everywhere, like, y'all want to see me sing? Get out the way, let me sing. So, sometimes you get things tempered so you're not a narcissist.
Oh man, I love that, because I think I always say it to people too. I'm like, if God gave me the talent of singing, it would be over for you all. I'm like, this whole episode, done.
Good. A wrap. It would be a wrap. Yes.
Monroe, you are just one of the most incredible human beings I've had the honor of, coming into contact with. And I want to just thank you for your time. Thank you for your generosity of spirit. And thank you for sharing with all of us something that we can actually take home, learn, and implement.
Oh, thank you. And I must say, happy birthday. I hope that, you found some time to, like, treat yourself and pamper yourself, and, self-joy in the midst of everything going on in the world. And, and just applaud you for, living your truth and continue to, being driven, to have your voice out there and being willing to take risk, right? And so congratulations on all that you're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, my friend. And I look forward to catching up with you soon. When you've moved,
yes,
let me know.
There you go. Yes.
Okay, I love you, and take care of yourself. Bye.
Take care of yourself.
I absolutely love Monroe. He is everything. So if you've liked this episode, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and rate. And next week is going to be part 2 with Dr. Drew Mikhail.